The Santerius Protocol. Act 1. The Discovery. The Andean wind cut through the valley like a knife, carrying with it the scent of snow and ancient stone. Dr. Sarah Collins, senior xenolinguist at Cambridge University's Institute for Extraterrestrial Communication, checked her rappelling gear one more time before leaning back into the descent. 200 feet below, the unexplored valley floor waited, shrouded in morning mist. "You're overthinking it again," called Dr. Randy Mitchell from 15 feet to her left, his American accent carrying easily across the gap. As lead astrogeologist for NASA's Planetary Sciences Division, he'd spent the better part of a decade studying rock formations on 3 continents, but nothing had excited him quite like this expedition. Just let the rope do the work. "Some of us prefer not to plummet to our deaths, thank you very much," Sarah shot back, her English accent crisp even through the exertion. Her dark hair, pulled back in a practical braid, whipped around her face as a gust caught her mid-descent. They'd been planning this expedition for 8 months, ever since satellite imagery had revealed unusual geological formations in this remote section of the Peruvian Andes. The area was so isolated that even the local indigenous communities had no name for it, referring to it only as the place where the sky touched down. Randy had been convinced the formations were evidence of a previously unknown volcanic event. Sarah had tagged along partly for the adventure, partly because Randy's enthusiasm was infectious, and partly because 2 years of long-distance romance had taught them both that any excuse to spend time together was worth taking. They'd met at the International Conference on Astrobiology in Mobile, Alabama, 26 months ago. Sarah had been presenting her controversial paper on the mathematical patterns in potential alien communication systems. Randy had been in the audience, and during the Q&A session, he'd asked a question so insightful it had stopped her mid-breath. They'd ended up talking until 3 in the morning at the hotel bar, and by the time the conference ended, they'd both known something fundamental had shifted in their lives. Now, halfway down a mountain in one of the most remote places on Earth, Sarah felt her boots slip against the rock face. Her heart lurched, but the rope held firm. She glanced over at Randy, who was watching her with that mixture of concern and confidence that had become so familiar. "I'm fine," she called before he could ask. "I know you are," he replied, grinning. "You're the toughest person I know, Dr. Collins." "Flattery will get you everywhere, Dr. Mitchell." They continued their descent in comfortable silence. The only sounds the whisper of rope through carabiners and the distant cry of an Andean condor. Sarah's mind wandered as she moved, thinking about the paper she needed to finish for the Journal of Xenolinguistics, about the faculty meeting she was missing back at Cambridge, about whether she and Randy would ever figure out how to be in the same country for more than a few weeks at a time. She was so lost in thought that she almost didn't notice when Randy suddenly stopped moving. "Sarah," he said, his voice carrying a strange note. "Look at this." She maneuvered herself closer, her boots finding purchase on a narrow ledge. Randy was pointing at something below them, a dark opening in the rock face, almost completely obscured by thick brush and hanging vines. It was perhaps 6 feet wide and 4 feet tall, a perfect oval that looked distinctly unnatural. "That's not a natural formation," Randy said, his scientific training evident in his careful phrasing. "No," Sarah agreed, feeling a tingle of excitement run down her spine. "It's definitely not." They exchanged a look, and without needing to discuss it, both began adjusting their descent to bring them level with the opening. 5 minutes later, they were standing on a narrow shelf of rock in front of the cave entrance, their ropes secured to a sturdy outcropping above. Randy pulled out his knife and began cutting away the brush. The vegetation was thick but not old. It had grown over the entrance relatively recently, perhaps within the last few decades. As he cleared the opening, Sarah felt a strange sensation, like static electricity raising the hairs on her arms. "Do you feel that?" she asked. Randy paused, holding still. "Yeah, weird. Could be some kind of electromagnetic field from mineral deposits. Or it could be something else entirely," Sarah murmured, her xenolinguist's imagination already running wild. With the entrance cleared, they peered into the darkness. The cave seemed to extend back into the mountain, but it was impossible to see how far. Randy unclipped his flashlight from his belt, but before he could turn it on, something extraordinary happened. A soft green light flickered to life deep within the cave, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. Then another light joined it, and another, until a dim pathway of bioluminescent green illuminated the cave's interior. Sarah and Randy stood frozen, staring at each other in the eerie glow. "That's not minerals," Randy said quietly. "No," Sarah whispered. "That's definitely not minerals. They should have been cautious. They should have documented the discovery, called their support team at base camp, followed proper protocols. But they were scientists, and curiosity was encoded in their DNA. Besides, they'd come all this way. Randy went first, ducking through the entrance with his hand on the cave wall for balance. Sarah followed immediately behind, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The green lights seemed to respond to their presence, brightening slightly as they moved deeper into the cave. The passage was roughly hewn but surprisingly regular, as if it had been carved rather than formed naturally. The air was cool and dry, without the dampness Sarah would have expected. Their footsteps echoed strangely, the sound seeming to travel farther than it should. They walked for what Sarah estimated was about 100 yards, the passage gradually widening and the ceiling rising higher above their heads. The green lights continued to guide them, spaced at regular intervals along the walls. And then, suddenly, the passage opened into a vast cavern. "My God," Randy breathed. The cavern was enormous, easily 100 feet across and 50 feet high. But it wasn't the size that made them both stop in their tracks, it was the walls. Every surface was covered in writing. Not petroglyphs, not primitive cave paintings. Writing, complex, intricate symbols arranged in precise rows and columns, covering every inch of the rock face. The characters were unlike anything Sarah had ever seen, and she'd spent her entire career studying writing systems from around the world and theoretical alien languages. The symbols seemed to shimmer in the green light, almost as if they were moving, though Sarah knew that had to be an optical illusion. Some were geometric circles, triangles, complex polygons. Others were more organic, flowing, and curved. They were arranged in clear patterns, with what looked like punctuation marks and mathematical notations interspersed throughout. "Sarah," Randy said, his voice hushed with awe. "What is this?" "I don't know," she replied, moving closer to the nearest wall. She reached out tentatively, her fingers hovering just above the symbols. "But it's not human. I'd stake my career on it." "Not human?" Randy joined her, his geologist's eye examining the rock itself. "But that's impossible. We're on Earth, in Peru." "Look at the precision," Sarah said, gesturing at the rows of symbols. "Look at the complexity. This isn't any writing system I've ever encountered, and I've studied them all. Ancient Sumerian, Egyptian hieroglyphs, Linear A, Rongorongo, the Indus Valley script. Nothing comes close to this level of sophistication." Randy was running his hand along the wall, feeling the texture. The symbols aren't carved or painted. They're part of the rock itself, like they were formed when the stone was formed. But that's impossible. This rock is millions of years old. They stood in silence for a moment, the implications washing over them. Then, Sarah's practical nature reasserted itself. "We need to document this," she said, pulling off her backpack. "Photos, measurements, samples if we can get them. This is the discovery of a lifetime, Randy. This could change everything we know about." "About what?" Randy interrupted gently. "About human history? About whether we're alone in the universe?" Sarah met his eyes. "Yes, both. All of it." They spent the next hour working methodically, taking hundreds of photographs from every angle, making sketches, taking measurements. Randy used his geological tools to analyze the rock composition, while Sarah tried to identify patterns in the writing. The more she looked, the more convinced she became that this was a genuine language, with grammar and syntax and meaning. Finally, exhausted and overwhelmed, they sat down in the center of the cavern, their backs against a large boulder. Sarah pulled out their water bottles and the sandwiches they'd packed that morning, ham and cheese for Randy, cucumber and cream cheese for her. It felt absurdly mundane to be eating lunch in the presence of what might be evidence of extraterrestrial contact. but they were both starving. "So," Randy said around a mouthful of sandwich, "what do we do with this?" Sarah took a long drink of water, considering. "We report it, obviously, but carefully. We need to control the narrative, make sure this is taken seriously and not dismissed as a hoax or misidentified as something mundane. Your colleagues at Cambridge will lose their minds. Your colleagues at NASA will lose theirs first," Sarah countered. "This is exactly what SETI has been looking for evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence." "Except it's not a radio signal from space," Randy pointed out. "It's writing on a cave wall in Peru. That raises some uncomfortable questions, like whether aliens visited Earth in the past, like whether they might still be here." They sat in silence for a moment, that thought hanging between them. Then Sarah, feeling the need to break the tension, said with exaggerated seriousness, "Well, if aliens are watching us right now, I hope they appreciate that I'm eating a vegetarian sandwich." "Wouldn't want them to think we're barbaric meat eaters," Randy snorted. "Sarah, you had bacon for breakfast. That was different. Bacon doesn't count." "How does bacon not count?" "It just doesn't. It's a breakfast exception." Randy shook his head, grinning. "Your logic is impeccable as always, Dr. Collins." "Thank you, Dr. Mitchell. I pride myself on my consistency." They finished their sandwiches, and Sarah was packing away the trash when Randy suddenly stood up, a mischievous look on his face. "What?" Sarah asked suspiciously. "Nothing," he said innocently. "I was just thinking about what you said earlier, about me being a meat-eating barbarian." "I didn't say you were a barbarian. I said the aliens might think, Randy, what are you doing?" He'd started moving toward her with exaggerated slowness, his arms outstretched like a movie monster. "I'm being a barbarian. Rawr." "Oh, for God's sake," Sarah said, but she was laughing as she scrambled to her feet. "You're ridiculous." "You love it," he said, lunging for her. Sarah dodged, her reflexes quick, and took off running across the cavern floor. Randy chased after her, both of them laughing like children, the tension of the discovery momentarily forgotten. She was fast, but Randy had longer legs, and he caught up with her near the far wall of the cavern. His arms wrapped around her waist from behind, and he spun her around, pressing her gently against the wall. They were both breathing hard, grinning at each other in the green light. "Caught you," he said softly. "So you did," Sarah replied, her voice dropping to a whisper. The playfulness shifted into something else, something deeper and more intense. Randy's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. Sarah's breath caught as he leaned in, his lips finding hers in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened. She kissed him back, her hands sliding up his chest to lock behind his neck. 2 years, and it still felt like this, like electricity, like coming home, like the answer to a question she hadn't known she was asking. His body pressed against hers, pinning her to the wall, and she could feel his heart racing as fast as her own. Randy's hand slid into her hair, loosening her braid, while his other hand found the small of her back, pulling her closer. Sarah made a small sound in the back of her throat, and Randy responded by trailing kisses along her jaw, down to the sensitive spot just below her ear. "I love you," he murmured against her skin. "I love you too," she whispered back. And then, without warning, everything changed. The wall behind Sarah's back suddenly felt warm, almost hot. She gasped and tried to pull away, but Randy was still holding her, still kissing her neck, unaware of what was happening. Then he felt it too, a vibration running through the stone, a deep thrumming that seemed to come from the very heart of the mountain. They broke apart, stumbling backward, and watched in shock as the symbols on the wall where Sarah had been leaning began to glow. Not the soft green of the lights that had guided them here, but a brilliant, pulsing blue that grew brighter with each passing second. "What did we do?" Sarah gasped. "I don't know," Randy said, grabbing her hand. "But I think we should—" He never finished the sentence. The entire cavern suddenly blazed with light, so bright they both had to shield their eyes. It was like standing inside a photo studio with every light turned on at maximum intensity. Sarah could feel heat on her skin, could hear a deep humming sound that seemed to vibrate in her bones. And then, impossibly, the floor in the center of the cavern began to move. A section of stone, perhaps 20 feet across, started to rise, smooth and controlled, revealing a structure beneath. It was a console of some kind, covered in panels and screens and controls that looked nothing like any human technology. The surface was a dark, metallic material that seemed to absorb and reflect light simultaneously, and it was covered in the same symbols they'd seen on the walls. But that wasn't all. As Sarah and Randy watched in stunned disbelief, the rocks and stalagmites around the edges of the cavern began to shimmer and fade, like a mirage dissolving in the heat. In their place, smooth walls appeared, studded with screens and panels. The rough cave floor became a seamless metallic surface. The stalactites hanging from the ceiling retracted or disappeared entirely, replaced by a smooth dome embedded with lights and what looked like sensor arrays. In less than 30 seconds, the ancient cave had transformed into something else entirely, something technological, something alien, something that had been hiding in plain sight for God only knew how long. "Randy," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "Randy, what is this?" He was staring around the transformed space, his face pale in the bright light. "I think," he said slowly, "we just activated something we really shouldn't have." Act 2. The spacecraft. The transformation continued around them, reality reshaping itself in ways that defied everything Sarah and Randy knew about physics and engineering. What had been a cave was now clearly something else: a room, a chamber, a space designed with purpose and intelligence. Sarah's scientific mind tried to process what she was seeing, cataloging details even as panic began to rise in her chest. The walls were smooth and curved, made of a material that looked like brushed metal but seemed to have depth to it, as if she could see layers beneath the surface. The screens that had appeared were dark but clearly functional, with the same alien symbols etched around their frames. The lighting came from everywhere and nowhere, a soft white glow that had no visible source. And the console in the center, it was massive, easily 12 feet across, rising from the floor in a gentle curve. Its surface was covered in what looked like touch-sensitive panels, each one marked with symbols and diagrams. Some of the panels were glowing softly, pulsing in a rhythm that reminded Sarah uncomfortably of a heartbeat. "We need to get out of here," Randy said, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. He grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her toward the passage they'd entered through. But the passage was gone. Where the rough cave entrance had been, there was now a smooth wall, indistinguishable from all the others. Randy ran his hands over it frantically, searching for a seam, a button, any kind of opening mechanism. There was nothing. No, he muttered, moving along the wall, pressing different sections. There has to be a way out. There has to be... A sound cut through his words, a deep, resonant tone that seemed to come from all around them. It was followed by a voice, speaking in a language Sarah had never heard before. The words were melodic but complex, with tonal variations and phonemes that human vocal cords would struggle to reproduce. Sarah's xenolinguist training kicked in automatically, her mind trying to parse the structure of the language even as her heart raced with fear. She could identify what sounded like verbs, nouns, possibly case markers. The syntax seemed to follow a subject-object-verb pattern. Or maybe the voice stopped, and there was a moment of silence. Then it spoke again, and this time Sarah could understand it. "This is the translator," the voice said in perfect, unaccented English. "Stand by for your instruction." Sarah felt Randy's hand tighten around hers. They stood frozen, staring at the empty air where the voice seemed to originate. "This is the origin of the planet Santerius," the voice continued, calm and measured. "Please take a seat." As the voice spoke, the floor in front of the central console began to shift. Two structures rose smoothly from the surface chairs, though unlike any chairs Sarah had ever seen. They were large, clearly designed for someone taller than the average human, with high backs and wide armrests. The material looked like the same dark metal as the console, but as Sarah watched, it seemed to soften and adjust, becoming something more like leather or fabric. "Randy," Sarah whispered, "what do we do?" He was staring at the chairs, his jaw clenched. "I don't think we have a choice." They approached the chair slowly, hand in hand, like children approaching a dangerous animal. The seats were positioned side by side, facing the console and the screens that now covered the far wall. As they got closer, Sarah could see that the chairs were actually quite beautiful in their alien way, with elegant curves and what looked like ergonomic design principles. "Together?" Randy asked. "Together," Sarah confirmed. They sat down simultaneously, and immediately Sarah knew this was a mistake. The moment her weight settled into the chair, it responded. The material shifted and adjusted, conforming to her body with unnerving precision. It was comfortable, disturbingly comfortable, like the chair had been made specifically for her. And then the straps appeared. They materialized from the sides of the chair, smooth bands of the same dark material, wrapping around Sarah's waist and over her shoulders in an X pattern across her chest. She tried to move, to pull away, but the straps held her firmly in place. Not painfully, but absolutely securely. "Sarah!" Randy was struggling against his own restraints, his face flushed with effort. "Sarah, are you okay?" "I'm fine," she said, though her voice was shaking. "I'm fine. Randy. I can't move. I can't get out." I know. Just stay calm. We'll figure this out." But Sarah could hear the fear in his voice, could see it in his eyes, and she could feel her own panic rising, threatening to overwhelm her. Her breath was coming faster, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The walls seemed to be closing in, the lights too bright, the air too thin. "I'm scared," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. "Randy, I'm really scared. What is happening?" Randy turned his head to look at her, and despite his own fear, his voice was steady when he spoke. Hey, look at me. We're going to be okay. Whatever this is, we'll figure it out together. Just breathe, Sarah. Breathe with me." He started taking slow, deliberate breaths, and Sarah tried to match him, tried to focus on the sound of his voice instead of the panic clawing at her chest. In through the nose, out through the mouth. In and out. In and out. "That's it," Randy said softly. "You're doing great. We're going to be fine. I promise." Before Sarah could respond, the voice spoke again. "This is the translator. Stand by for your instruction. This is the origin of the planet Santerius. Please take a seat." "We're already sitting," Randy called out to the empty air. "We're sitting. What do you want from us?" There was a pause, and then the voice continued as if Randy hadn't spoken. "Genetic markers confirmed. Species, Homo sapiens. Origin, Earth, Sol system. Authorization, Omega Protocol. Initiating launch sequence." "Launch sequence?" Sarah's voice rose in pitch. "What launch sequence? We're in a cave." But even as she spoke, she could feel it, a vibration running through the chair, through the floor, through the entire structure around them. The screens on the far wall flickered to life, showing images that made no sense at first. Readouts in the alien language, diagrams of what looked like star systems, and Sarah's breath caught. One of the screens showed an external view, and she could see the mountain. Their mountain. The Andean peak they'd been climbing just an hour ago. But the perspective was wrong. They were looking at it from above, from outside, as if... "Oh my God," Randy breathed. "We're moving." The vibration increased, becoming a deep thrumming that Sarah could feel in her bones. On the screen, the mountain was getting smaller, falling away beneath them. She could see the valley, the river, the distant peaks of the Andes range, and they were rising impossibly fast. "This isn't a cave," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "This isn't a cave at all." "No," Randy agreed, his eyes fixed on the screens. "It's a ship. We're on a spaceship." The screens showed the mountain receding rapidly now, the entire landscape visible. Sarah could see the curvature of the earth beginning to appear at the edges of the view. They were accelerating, moving faster than any human-made vehicle could possibly move. "We have to stop this," Sarah said, pulling against the restraints. "We have to. There must be controls, something we can." "Sarah, stop," Randy said firmly. "You'll hurt yourself. Just wait. Let's see what happens. Sarah's voice was rising toward hysteria. "Randy, we're leaving Earth. We're on an alien spaceship that's leaving Earth, and you want to see what happens? What choice do we have? Randy's voice was calm, but Sarah could see the tension in his jaw, the white-knuckled grip he had on the armrests. We can't get out of these chairs. We can't reach the controls. All we can do is wait and try to understand what's happening. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to scream, wanted to do anything but sit here helplessly while an alien ship carried them away from everything they knew. But Randy was right. They had no choice. On the screens, the Earth was shrinking. Sarah could see the curve of South America, the blue of the Pacific Ocean, the white swirls of clouds. It was beautiful and terrible, and she felt tears streaming down her face. "I don't want to leave," she whispered. "I don't want to go." "I know," Randy said softly. "I know, Sarah. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." They sat in silence as the ship continued to accelerate, watching their home planet grow smaller and smaller on the screens. The vibration had settled into a steady hum, almost soothing in its consistency. The restraints held them firmly, but not uncomfortably, and Sarah found herself wondering about the beings who had designed this ship, who had built these chairs, who had left this vessel hidden in an Andean cave for God only knew how long. The voice spoke again, making them both jump. "Departure from Earth successful. Estimated travel time to Santerius, 47 Earth days. Life support systems active. Nutrition and hydration systems active. Recreational facilities active. Medical bay active. All systems functioning within normal parameters. 47 days, Sarah repeated numbly. We're going to be on the ship for 47 days. To Santerius, Randy added. Whatever and wherever that is." The screens shifted, and new images appeared. One showed what looked like a star map, with a glowing line connecting 2 points. Sarah assumed one point was Earth, which meant the other must be Santerius. The distance between them was vast. The line stretched across what looked like a significant portion of the galaxy. Another screen showed the interior of the ship, a schematic that revealed the true size of the vessel. It was enormous, far larger than the chamber they were in. Sarah could see multiple levels, dozens of rooms, corridors connecting different sections. The bridge where they sat was just a small part of a much larger structure. "Look," Randy said, pointing at the schematic. "There are other rooms. Living quarters, maybe. Storage. That looks like it might be a galley or mess hall." "And that," Sarah said, her xenolinguist's eye picking out patterns in the labels. "I think that's a medical bay. And that might be. I don't know. An armory? An armory?" Randy looked at her sharply. "Why would a ship need an armory?" "I don't know. But look at the symbols. That's definitely a weapon indicator. See the way it's marked? And those look like protective gear symbols." They studied the schematic in silence, trying to understand the layout of their prison. Because that's what it was, Sarah realized. No matter how advanced, no matter how comfortable, they were prisoners on this ship, being carried away from Earth against their will. The restraints suddenly released, retracting back into the chairs so quickly that Sarah gasped. She sat frozen for a moment, not quite believing she was free, and then she was on her feet, stumbling away from the chair on shaky legs. Randy was beside her immediately, his arms around her, holding her steady. "I've got you," he murmured. "I've got you." Sarah clung to him, her face pressed against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of his sweat and sunscreen and the faint smell of the coffee he'd had that morning. Real, solid, human. The only familiar thing in this impossible situation. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice muffled against his shirt. "We're going to survive," Randy said firmly. "We're going to figure out how this ship works. We're going to learn everything we can. And we're going to find a way home." Sarah pulled back to look at him. "You really think we can?" "I have to believe we can," he said, "because the alternative is unacceptable." She nodded, drawing strength from his certainty, even though she suspected he was just as terrified as she was. Okay. So what do we do first?" Randy looked around the bridge, his scientific mind already working on the problem. "First, we explore. We need to understand what resources we have, what this ship is capable of." The voice said, "Life support is active, nutrition and hydration systems are active. That means there's food and water somewhere. We need to find it. And then? And then we figure out how to fly this thing. Because if we're going to Santerius, we need to understand how to get back. They approached the central console cautiously, studying the alien controls. The panels were still glowing softly, and Sarah could see that some of them were displaying information readouts and diagrams that she couldn't yet interpret. The symbols were the same as those they'd seen on the cave walls, but here they were clearly functional, part of an interface designed to be used. Randy reached out tentatively and touched one of the panels. It responded immediately, the glow brightening, and a new screen appeared in the air above the console, a holographic display showing what looked like a navigation chart. "Okay," Randy said, a note of excitement creeping into his voice despite their situation. "Okay, this is good. The interface is responsive. We can interact with it." Sarah moved to another panel, this one marked with symbols that looked like they might relate to communication. When she touched it, a different holographic display appeared, showing what looked like a list of something. Destinations? Frequencies? She couldn't tell yet. They spent the next hour exploring the bridge, touching panels, watching the holographic displays appear and disappear, trying to understand the logic of the alien interface. It was frustrating work. Every time they thought they understood something, a new display would appear that contradicted their assumptions. But slowly, patterns began to emerge. The ship seemed to be largely automated, running on systems that had been programmed long ago. The voice they'd heard the translator appeared to be an AI of some kind, designed to interface with the ship's occupants. The controls were sophisticated but not incomprehensible. They followed a logic that, while alien, was still based on principles Sarah and Randy could recognize. "I think," Sarah said slowly, studying a particularly complex display, "I think this ship was designed to be operated by people who didn't necessarily know how to fly it. Look at how the interface works. It's intuitive, almost foolproof, like it was made for, I don't know, passengers rather than pilots." "A transport ship," Randy said, nodding. "That makes sense. But transport for what? And why was it hidden on Earth? And why did it activate when we—" Sarah trailed off, feeling her face flush. "When we kissed," Randy finished, a slight smile tugging at his lips despite everything. "Yeah, that's a question I'd like answered too." The voice spoke again, making them both jump. They'd almost forgotten about it. "Occupants are advised to proceed to the mess hall for nutrition. Occupants are advised to proceed to living quarters for rest. Occupants are advised to familiarize themselves with ship facilities." A new holographic display appeared, showing a map of the ship with a glowing path marked from the bridge to what was labeled in English now, thanks to the translator as the Nutrition Center. Sarah and Randy looked at each other. "I guess we're being given a tour," Randy said. "I guess we are," Sarah agreed. They moved toward the wall where the passage had been, and as they approached, a door materialized, or rather, a section of the wall simply slid aside, revealing a corridor beyond. The corridor was lit with the same sourceless white light as the bridge, and the walls were the same smooth, metallic material. Sarah took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped through the doorway. Randy followed close behind, his hand finding hers in the dimness. Whatever was going to happen next, they would face it together. Act 3. Exploration. The corridor stretched before them, curving gently to the right, in a way that suggested they were following the outer edge of the ship's hull. The floor was smooth but not slippery, with a slight texture that provided traction. Every 20 feet or so, there were panels on the walls marked with the alien symbols, glowing softly in various colors: blue, green, amber. "I think those are status indicators," Randy said, pausing to examine one of the panels. "See how this one is blue? And that one down there is green? I bet they're showing that different systems are operational, which means if we see a red one, we should probably worry," Sarah added. They continued down the corridor, following the glowing path that the ship's AI had provided. Sarah found herself studying everything, her mind automatically cataloging details: the way the walls curved, the spacing of the panels, the quality of the light. Every detail was a clue to understanding the beings who had built this ship. "They were taller than us," she said suddenly. Randy looked at her. "What?" "The builders. They were taller. Look at the proportions. The ceiling is at least 9 feet high, maybe 10. And remember those chairs on the bridge? They were sized for someone bigger than us. Good observation, Randy said. What else? Sarah thought for a moment, looking around. They valued efficiency. Look at how clean the design is, how streamlined. No wasted space, no unnecessary decoration. Everything serves a purpose. Except for that, Randy said, pointing. Sarah followed his gaze and saw what he meant. Set into the wall at regular intervals were small alcoves, each one containing what looked like a sculpture or art piece. They were abstract forms, made of the same dark metallic material as the ship, but shaped into flowing organic curves that were beautiful in their simplicity. Okay, so they valued beauty too, Sarah amended. They were practical but not purely utilitarian. They wanted their environment to be aesthetically pleasing. That's actually kind of reassuring, Randy said. I mean, if they cared about art, they probably weren't completely alien in their thinking. They reached a junction where the corridor split into 3 directions. The glowing path led them to the right, but Sarah paused, looking down the other corridors. Should we follow the path or explore on our own? She asked. Randy considered. Let's follow the path for now. We need food and water, and we need to understand the basic layout. We can explore more thoroughly later. They took the right corridor, and after another 50 feet, it opened into a large room. The mess hall, Sarah realized, or the nutrition center, as the ship's AI had called it. It was a surprisingly pleasant space. The room was circular, about 40 feet in diameter, with a domed ceiling that displayed what looked like a star field, though whether it was a real-time view of the space outside or just a decorative display, Sarah couldn't tell. Around the perimeter of the room were several stations, each one clearly designed for food preparation or storage. In the center of the room was a large table, also circular, with seating for perhaps a dozen people. The chairs were the same style as those on the bridge, though smaller and without the restraint systems. Okay, Randy said, moving toward the nearest station. Let's see if we can figure out how to get some food. The station was marked with symbols that Sarah was beginning to recognize as relating to nutrition and sustenance. There was a panel similar to those on the bridge, and when Randy touched it, a holographic menu appeared displayed in English, thanks to the translator. The options were strange, protein synthesis, type A, carbohydrate matrix, variant 7, vitamin supplement, full spectrum. Nothing that sounded like actual food. I think it's a synthesizer, Sarah said, studying the menu. It doesn't store prepared food, it creates it on demand from base materials. Like a replicator, Randy said. Star Trek style. Essentially, yes, though probably more limited in what it can produce. Randy selected protein synthesis, type A, and carbohydrate matrix, variant 7, and a moment later, a compartment opened in the station. Inside were 2 items that looked vaguely like food bars, one pale and slightly translucent, the other darker and more solid. Randy picked up the protein bar and sniffed it cautiously. Smells like nothing. Absolutely nothing. Probably designed to be nutritionally complete, but culturally neutral, Sarah said. They wouldn't know what species might end up using this ship, so they made something that would work for a wide range of biochemistries. Randy took a small bite, chewed thoughtfully, and swallowed. It tastes like cardboard. Slightly sweet cardboard. Appetizing, Sarah said dryly, but she took the carbohydrate bar and tried it herself. Randy was right. It was bland to the point of being almost flavorless, with a texture somewhere between bread and foam. But it was food, and her body recognized it as such. Her stomach, which she'd been trying to ignore, suddenly reminded her that she hadn't eaten since their sandwiches in the cave, which now felt like a lifetime ago. They sat at the central table, eating their synthesized meal in silence. Sarah found herself thinking about all the meals she'd shared with Randy over the past 2 years. Dinner at that little Italian place in Cambridge. Breakfast at the hotel in Mobile where they'd met. Late-night pizza in his apartment in Houston. All of those moments felt impossibly distant now, like memories from someone else's life. We're going to get home, Randy said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. I don't know how yet, but we will. Sarah wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that this was just a temporary setback, an adventure they'd laugh about someday. But the rational part of her mind, the part that had spent years studying the vastness of space and the improbability of interstellar travel, knew better. They were on an alien ship, traveling to an unknown destination, with no way to communicate with Earth, and no guarantee that they'd ever see home again. But she didn't say any of that. Instead, she reached across the table and took Randy's hand. "Together," she said. "Together," he agreed. After they'd eaten, they continued their exploration. The glowing path led them to the living quarters, a section of the ship with several small rooms, each one containing what was clearly a bed, though larger than a human bed, and made of the same adaptive material as the chairs, storage compartments, and a small attached bathroom. The bathroom was perhaps the most alien thing they'd encountered so far. There was something that might have been a toilet, though its design was strange enough that Sarah wasn't entirely sure. There was definitely a shower, a circular enclosure with nozzles positioned at various heights. And there was a sink, or at least something that served the same purpose, with controls that took them several minutes to figure out. "At least we won't have to go 47 days without washing," Randy said, examining the shower controls. They chose adjacent rooms, though Sarah found herself reluctant to be separated from Randy even by a single wall. The room was comfortable enough the bed adjusted to her body when she sat on it, and the lighting could be controlled by touching a panel near the door. But it felt wrong, sleeping in an alien bed on an alien ship while Earth fell farther and farther behind them. "I don't think I can sleep," she said, standing in the doorway between their rooms. "Me neither," Randy admitted. He was sitting on his bed, his elbows on his knees, his head in his hands. "Every time I close my eyes, I see Earth getting smaller on those screens." Sarah crossed the room and sat beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Tell me something normal, something from before." Randy was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "Do you remember that conference in Mobile? The first night, after your presentation?" "Of course I remember. I almost didn't come to the hotel bar. I was tired, and I had an early session the next morning, and I figured I'd just go to bed. But something made me change my mind. I still don't know what it was, just a feeling that I should go, that something important was going to happen." Sarah smiled despite everything. "I'm glad you did. Me too. Best decision I ever made." He turned to look at her, his hand coming up to cup her face. "Whatever happens, Sarah, I want you to know that these past 2 years have been the best of my life. Even being trapped on an alien ship is better than being anywhere else without you." Sarah felt tears prickling at her eyes. "Randy." He kissed her, soft and gentle, and for a moment, Sarah could almost forget where they were. Almost forget that they were millions of miles from home, traveling toward an unknown destination. Almost forget everything except the feeling of his lips on hers, his arms around her, his heart beating against her chest. When they finally pulled apart, Randy said, "We should keep exploring. The ship's AI said there were recreational facilities. Maybe we can find something to take our minds off." Everything. They left the living quarters and continued down the corridor, this time ignoring the glowing path and choosing their own route. The ship was larger than Sarah had realized, with multiple levels connected by what looked like elevator shafts, though the elevators themselves seemed to work on some kind of magnetic levitation rather than cables. On the second level, they found what the AI had called recreational facilities. The first room they entered was clearly a gym, though it looked nothing like any gym on Earth. There were no treadmills or weight machines. Instead, there were platforms of various heights, bars suspended at different angles, and what looked like resistance bands made of some kind of elastic material. In the center of the room was a large open space with a floor that seemed to have some give to it, like a sprung dance floor. "I think it's designed for low-gravity exercise," Randy said, examining one of the platforms. "Or maybe for a species that move differently than we do. Look at how the bars are positioned. They're not set up for human proportions." "But we could probably adapt them," Sarah said. "Use them for our own exercises. It would be good to stay in shape, especially if we're going to be here for 47 days. The next room was even more surprising, a swimming pool. It was small, perhaps 20 feet long and 10 feet wide, but it was definitely a pool, filled with clear water that seemed to circulate on its own. The walls of the pool room were transparent, showing the starfield outside, and Sarah felt a moment of vertigo looking at the stars while standing next to a pool of water. How is this even possible? She wondered aloud. The water should be floating in zero gravity, or at least sloshing around as the ship moves. Artificial gravity, Randy said. The ship must have some kind of gravity generation system. I've been feeling it since we left Earth. We're standing upright, walking normally, like we're on a planet. That shouldn't be possible, but here we are. They continued their exploration, finding room after room that revealed more about the ship and its builders. There was a medical bay, as they'd seen on the schematic, filled with equipment that looked both familiar and alien. Sarah recognized what might have been a diagnostic scanner, something that could have been a surgical table, and cabinets full of instruments and supplies. I hope we don't need to use any of this, Randy said, looking around the medical bay with unease. Me too, Sarah agreed, though it's good to know it's here just in case. They found the chamber that Sarah had noticed on the schematic, the one with instructions on its cover. It was a small room, barely large enough for 2 people, with walls covered in the alien symbols. In the center of the room was a pedestal with what looked like a helmet or headpiece resting on it. What do you think it is? Randy asked. Sarah studied the symbols on the walls, her xenolinguist's training helping her parse the meaning. I think it's a learning chamber. These symbols here, they relate to knowledge transfer, information download. And this one means caution or warning. So it's dangerous? Maybe. Or maybe it's just intense. Like it could be overwhelming to have information directly uploaded into your brain. Randy looked at the helmet warily. I don't think we should try it. Not yet, anyway. Not until we understand more about how it works. Sarah agreed, though part of her was curious. If the helmet could teach them about the ship, about Santerius, about the beings who had built all of this, wouldn't that be worth the risk? But Randy was right. They needed to be careful. They needed to survive. They found the armory next, and it was exactly what Sarah had predicted from the schematic. The room was lined with racks holding what were unmistakably weapons, though their design was unlike any human weapon. There were devices that looked like rifles, but with no visible barrel or trigger. There were smaller handheld devices that might have been pistols. There were what looked like grenades or explosives. Smooth spheres marked with warning symbols. And there were suits, full-body protective gear that looked like a cross between a spacesuit and armor. They were made of a flexible material that seemed to harden when Randy touched it, and they came with helmets that had transparent faceplates. Why would a transport ship need weapons? Sarah asked, feeling a chill run down her spine. I don't know, Randy said, but I don't like it. It suggests that wherever we're going, it might not be safe. The last room they explored was a storage area, and it was here that they found the spacesuits. They were similar to the protective suits in the armory, but clearly designed for a different purpose. These were for working in vacuum, not for combat. They came with helmets, gloves, and boots, all made of the same adaptive material that seemed to be a hallmark of the ship's technology. At the far end of the storage room was a pressure chamber, an airlock, Sarah realized. It had 2 doors, one leading into the ship and one leading outside. Through the small window in the outer door, she could see the stars, brilliant and unblinking in the void. We could go outside, Randy said quietly, if we wanted to. If we needed to. Why would we need to? Sarah asked. I don't know. Repairs maybe. Or if we needed to. I don't know. Escape? Escape to where? We're in the middle of space. Randy didn't answer, but Sarah could see the wheels turning in his mind. He was thinking about possibilities, about contingencies, about ways to survive. It was what made him a good scientist, the ability to think through problems, to consider all the angles. They made their way back to the bridge, exhausted and overwhelmed by everything they'd seen. The screens were still displaying information, the star map, the ship's status, the estimated time to Santerius. 46 days and 18 hours now. They'd been on the ship for 6 hours, though it felt like a lifetime. Sarah sank into one of the captain's chairs, grateful that the restraints didn't activate this time. Randy sat beside her, and they stared at the screens in silence. We need a plan, Randy said finally. We need to figure out what we're going to do when we reach Santerius. Assuming we survive the journey, Sarah added. We'll survive. We have food, water, air. The ship is taking care of us. But why? Sarah asked. The question that had been nagging at her since they'd activated the ship. Why did it activate for us? Why did it bring us here? We're not the species that built this ship, we're not even close. So why are we being taken to Santerius? Randy was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, the AI mentioned something when we first sat down. Do you remember? It said, genetic markers confirmed, and authorization, Omega Protocol. What if? What if humans are somehow connected to the species that built this ship? That's impossible, Sarah said automatically. Humans evolved on Earth. We have a complete fossil record showing our evolution from earlier hominids. There's no way we're related to an alien species. Then how do you explain this? Randy gestured at the ship around them. How do you explain the fact that the ship recognized us? That it's taking us to Santerius? That it's keeping us alive? Sarah didn't have an answer. It was a question that went against everything she knew about human evolution, about biology, about the nature of life in the universe, but she couldn't deny the evidence in front of her. We need to learn more, she said finally. We need to understand what Santerius is, who built this ship, and why we're being taken there. And we need to figure out how to get home. Agreed, Randy said. So where do we start? Sarah thought about the learning chamber, about the helmet that could supposedly transfer knowledge directly into their minds. It was risky, potentially dangerous, but it might be their best chance at understanding what was happening to them. I think, she said slowly, we need to use the learning chamber. I know it's dangerous, but we need information, and that seems like the fastest way to get it. Randy looked at her, concern evident in his eyes. Are you sure? No, Sarah admitted. But I don't see another option. We can't spend 47 days stumbling around in the dark, trying to figure out alien technology by trial and error. We need to understand this ship, and we need to understand it now. Randy nodded slowly. Okay, but we do it carefully. One of us at a time. So if something goes wrong, the other one can help. And we start with short sessions, just to see how it works. Agreed, Sarah said. And I'll go first. Sarah. I'm the xenolinguist, Randy. If anyone's going to be able to process alien information, it's me. Besides, you need to be here to pull me out if something goes wrong. Randy didn't look happy, but he didn't argue. They made their way back to the learning chamber, and Sarah stood in front of the pedestal, looking at the helmet. It was a simple design, just a curved piece of material that would fit over the crown of her head, with thin tendrils that would presumably make contact with her skull. Ready? Randy asked, his hand on her shoulder. No, Sarah said honestly. But let's do it anyway. She picked up the helmet, and the moment her fingers touched it, it activated. The tendrils began to move, writhing like living things, and Sarah had to suppress a shudder of revulsion. She placed the helmet on her head, and the tendrils immediately found their positions, pressing gently against her temples, her forehead, the base of her skull. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, information flooded into Sarah's mind like a dam breaking. Images, concepts, words in languages she'd never heard but somehow understood. The history of Santerius, a planet orbiting a star 47 light-years from Earth. The Santerian people, tall and graceful, with skin that shimmered like oil on water and eyes that could see into the infrared spectrum. Their civilization, ancient and advanced, built on principles of harmony and balance, and the Omega Protocol, a plan conceived thousands of years ago when the Santerians had first discovered Earth. They had found a young species, humans with potential but also with a dangerous tendency toward violence and self-destruction. The Santerians had debated what to do. Some wanted to make contact, to guide humanity toward a better path. Others wanted to leave Earth alone, to let humans develop naturally, or destroy themselves. In the end, they had chosen a middle path. They had left ships hidden around Earth, programmed to activate only when humans reached a certain level of development when they were ready to join the galactic community. The ships would bring selected humans to Santerius, where they would learn about the wider universe and decide whether humanity was ready to take its place among the stars. But something had gone wrong. The Santerians had disappeared, their civilization collapsing in a catastrophe that the helmet's information didn't fully explain. The ships had remained hidden, waiting for a trigger that might never come. Until Sarah and Randy had stumbled into one. The information kept coming, overwhelming in its scope and detail. Sarah learned about the ship's systems, about how to navigate, how to communicate, how to survive. She learned about Santerius, about its cities and its people, about the beauty and the tragedy of a civilization that had reached for the stars and fallen. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The helmet released her, the tendrils retracting, and Sarah stumbled backward. Randy caught her, his arms strong and steady, and she clung to him as her mind tried to process everything she'd just learned. Sarah? Sarah, are you okay? Talk to me. I'm okay, she managed to say, though her voice sounded strange to her own ears. I'm okay, I need a minute. Randy helped her out of the learning chamber and back to the living quarters, where she collapsed onto the bed. Her head was pounding, and she felt dizzy and nauseous, like she'd just gotten off a roller coaster. But underneath the physical discomfort, there was something else, a sense of wonder, of understanding, of connection to something vast and ancient. What did you see? Randy asked, sitting beside her. Sarah took a deep breath and began to explain. She told him about Santerius, about the Santerians, about the Omega Protocol. She told him about the civilization that had risen and fallen, about the ships left behind, about the hope that humanity might one day be ready to join the galactic community. Randy listened in silence, his expression growing more and more amazed as she spoke. So we're not prisoners, he said when she finished. We're, what? Ambassadors? Representatives? I think so, Sarah said. Though I don't think the Santerians expected the ships to activate after they were gone. I think we're supposed to go to Santerius, learn about their civilization, and then return to Earth to share what we've learned. But if the Santerians are gone, who are we going to meet? I don't know, Sarah admitted. The information in the helmet didn't cover that. But I guess we'll find out in 46 days. Act 4. Discoveries and Adventures. The days aboard the ship fell into a rhythm, though days was a relative term when you were traveling through the void between stars. Sarah and Randy established a routine, partly to maintain their sanity, and partly because the structure helped them feel like they had some control over their situation. They woke at the same time each morning, or what they designated as morning, since the ship's lighting could be adjusted to simulate a day-night cycle. They ate breakfast in the mess hall, forcing down the bland, synthesized food while trying to imagine it was something more appetizing. Then they spent several hours on the bridge, studying the ship's systems and trying to understand the alien technology. Randy had used the learning chamber after Sarah, and while he'd found the experience just as overwhelming, he'd come away with a different set of information about the ship's engineering, its propulsion systems, its navigation. Between the two of them, they were slowly piecing together a comprehensive understanding of the vessel that was carrying them across the galaxy. In the afternoons, they exercised in the gym, adapting the alien equipment to human physiology. Sarah found that the resistance bands were excellent for strength training, while the platforms could be used for balance and agility work. Randy preferred the open space in the center, where he practiced a combination of calisthenics and the martial arts he'd studied in college. Sometimes they swam in the small pool, floating in the clear water while the stars wheeled past beyond the transparent walls. It was surreal and beautiful and deeply unsettling, a reminder that they were farther from home than any human had ever been. Evenings were for exploration and experimentation. They discovered that the ship had a library of sorts, a room filled with data storage devices that could project holographic displays. The information was all in the Santerian language, but thanks to the learning chamber, both Sarah and Randy could now read it with varying degrees of fluency. They learned about Santerian history, about their art and music and literature. They learned about their science, which was far more advanced than anything on Earth. They learned about their philosophy, which emphasized balance and harmony, and the interconnectedness of all life. And they learned about the catastrophe that had destroyed Santerian civilization. It had started with a disease, a plague that had swept across Santerius with terrifying speed. The Santerians had been unprepared. Their advanced medical technology had made them complacent, and by the time they realized the severity of the threat, it was too late. The plague had killed billions, and those who survived found themselves in a world that was falling apart. Infrastructure collapsed, supply chains broke down. The carefully balanced systems that had sustained Santerian civilization for millennia began to fail. And in the chaos, something even worse had emerged, a faction of Santerians who believed that the plague was a punishment, that their civilization had grown too proud, too divorced from the natural order. This faction, calling themselves the Purifiers, had begun destroying the very technology that might have saved them. The war between the Purifiers and those who wanted to preserve Santerian civilization had been brief but devastating. In the end, there were no winners, only survivors, scattered across a dying world. The last entry in the historical records was dated approximately 200 Earth years ago. After that, silence. "So we're going to a dead world," Randy said one evening, as they sat in the library reviewing the historical records. "A planet full of ruins and ghosts." "Maybe," Sarah said, "but maybe not. 200 years is a long time. Maybe some Santerians survived. Maybe they rebuilt. Or maybe we're going to arrive at a planet that can't support life anymore, and we'll be trapped there with no way to get home." Sarah didn't have a response to that. It was a possibility they'd both been trying not to think about, but it loomed larger with each passing day. On the 15th day of their journey, something unexpected happened. Sarah was on the bridge, studying the navigation systems, when one of the screens suddenly flashed red. An alarm sounded a low, pulsing tone that made her heart race. "Randy!" she called. "Randy, get up here!" He arrived within seconds, slightly out of breath from running. "What's wrong?" "I don't know." The alarm just started, and this screen, she pointed at the display, which was showing a schematic of the ship with one section highlighted in red. Randy studied the display, his brow furrowed. "That's the propulsion system. Something's wrong with the engines." As if in response to his words, the ship shuddered. It was a subtle vibration, barely noticeable, but it was there, a wrongness in the smooth hum that had become the background noise of their lives. "Can you fix it?" Sarah asked. "I don't know. Let me see if I can access the diagnostic systems." Randy moved to the central console and began touching panels, bringing up holographic displays that showed the ship's internal systems in detail. Sarah watched over his shoulder, trying to follow his logic as he navigated through layers of information. "There," he said, pointing at a section of the display. "See that? One of the power couplings in the main engine has failed. It's not critical yet, but if we don't fix it, it could cascade into a complete engine failure. Can we fix it from here?" "No. We'll need to access the engine room directly. And," he paused, his expression grim, "we'll need to do an EVA." "EVA?" Sarah's stomach dropped. "You mean go outside? In space?" "The coupling is on the exterior of the engine housing. There's no way to reach it from inside the ship." Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. The idea of going outside, of being exposed to the vacuum of space, with nothing between her and the infinite void but a thin suit, it was terrifying. But what choice did they have? "Okay," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Okay, what do we need to do?" They spent the next hour preparing. They retrieved the spacesuits from the storage room, and Randy showed Sarah how to put hers on. The suit was surprisingly comfortable once she got used to it, the material adjusting to her body and providing support in all the right places. The helmet sealed with a soft hiss, and suddenly Sarah was breathing recycled air, hearing her own breath loud in her ears. Randy's voice came through the helmet's communication system. "Can you hear me?" "Yes," Sarah replied. "I can hear you." "Good. Okay. Let's go through the checklist." "Oxygen levels?" Sarah looked at the display inside her helmet. "Full, showing 12 hours of air. Same here. Suit integrity? All green. Okay. Let's head to the airlock." They made their way to the storage room and entered the pressure chamber. Randy sealed the inner door, and Sarah felt her heart rate spike as she realized there was no turning back now. The chamber began to depressurize. and Sarah could hear the air being pumped out, could feel the suit stiffening around her as the pressure differential increased. And then the outer door opened, and Sarah was looking at space. It was beautiful. More beautiful than any photograph, any video, any description could ever capture. The stars were everywhere, brilliant points of light against the absolute black of the void. And there, in the distance, was a nebula, a cloud of gas and dust glowing in shades of pink and purple and blue. "Sarah, you okay?" Randy's voice brought her back to the present. Yeah, I'm okay. It's incredible. I know. Come on, we need to get to the engine housing." They used the handholds built into the ship's exterior to pull themselves along, moving slowly and carefully. Sarah tried not to think about the fact that she was clinging to the outside of a spaceship traveling at a significant fraction of the speed of light. Tried not to think about what would happen if she lost her grip, if she floated away into the void. The engine housing was a massive structure at the rear of the ship, glowing with a soft blue light that Sarah assumed was some kind of radiation from the propulsion system. Randy led her to a specific section, where a panel had been marked with warning symbols. "There," he said, pointing. "That's the coupling that failed. I need to remove it and install a replacement." "Where's the replacement?" "In my suit's tool compartment. The ship's AI loaded it before we left." Sarah watched as Randy worked, his movements careful and precise despite the bulky gloves. He removed the failed coupling, a cylindrical device about the size of a soda can, and replaced it with a new one from his suit. The whole process took about 20 minutes, and Sarah spent the entire time fighting down panic, forcing herself to breathe slowly and evenly. Finally, Randy stepped back. "That should do it. Let's get back inside and see if it worked." They made their way back to the airlock, and Sarah had never been so relieved to feel the pressure chamber repressurizing, to remove her helmet and breathe the ship's air again. Her hands were shaking, and she realized she was covered in sweat despite the suit's temperature regulation. "You did great," Randy said, pulling off his own helmet. "I know that was scary, but you handled it perfectly." "I was terrified the entire time," Sarah admitted. "Me too," Randy said. "But we did it. We fixed the ship." They returned to the bridge and checked the displays. The red warning had disappeared, replaced by green status indicators. The ship's vibration had smoothed out, returning to the steady hum they'd grown accustomed to. "Crisis averted," Randy said, sinking into one of the captain's chairs. Sarah sat beside him, still feeling shaky from the adrenaline. "Do you think there will be more problems?" "Probably. The ship is old, and it's been sitting dormant for who knows how long. Things are going to break down, but we can handle it. We'll figure it out." Sarah nodded, drawing strength from his confidence. They'd survived their first real crisis. They could survive whatever else the journey threw at them. The days continued to pass. 20 days, 25, 30. Sarah and Randy fell deeper into their routine, but they also found moments of joy and connection amidst the strangeness of their situation. They discovered that the ship's library included Santarian music, and they spent evenings listening to the alien compositions, haunting melodies played on instruments they couldn't identify, with harmonies that were both beautiful and slightly unsettling to human ears. They found that the mess hall's synthesizer could be programmed to create variations on the basic food bars. And while nothing tasted quite like real food, they managed to create something that was at least more interesting than the default options. They exercised together, swam together, explored the ship together, and at night they slept in the same bed, finding comfort in each other's presence in the vast loneliness of space. On the 32nd day, Sarah made a discovery that changed everything. She was in the library, reviewing the Santarian historical records for what felt like the 100th time, when she noticed something she'd missed before. A reference to a facility on Santerius called the Archive, a repository of knowledge that had been designed to survive even the collapse of civilization. The Archive, according to the records, contained not just Santarian knowledge but information gathered from dozens of other species across the galaxy. It was a library of galactic civilization, protected by advanced technology and designed to be accessible to any species that reached a certain level of development. And according to the coordinates listed in the records, the archive was still active. "Randy," Sarah said, her voice shaking with excitement. "Randy, you need to see this." He came running, and Sarah showed him what she'd found. As he read the information, his eyes grew wider. "If this is real," he said slowly, "if the archive still exists and is still functional, then we might be able to find answers," Sarah finished. "About what happened to the Santerians, about whether any of them survived, about how we can get home, and about humanity's place in the galaxy," Randy added. "If the archive has information about other species, we could learn so much. We could bring back knowledge that would change everything about how we understand the universe." They looked at each other, and Sarah saw her own excitement reflected in Randy's eyes. For the first time since they'd been taken from Earth, she felt something other than fear and uncertainty. She felt hope. The remaining days of the journey passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah and Randy studied everything they could find about the archive, about Santerius, about what they might encounter when they arrived. They practiced using the ship's communication systems, hoping they might be able to contact anyone on the planet's surface. They also prepared for the possibility that they might find nothing, that Santerius might be a dead world, the archive a ruin, their journey a one-way trip to a graveyard of an alien civilization. But they had to hope. Hope was all they had. On the 47th day, the ship's AI announced that they were approaching Santerius. Sarah and Randy were on the bridge, strapped into the captain's chairs as the ship began its deceleration. The screens showed the star system ahead, a yellow sun, slightly smaller than Earth's, with several planets orbiting it. And there, the third planet from the sun, was Santerius. It was beautiful. From space, it looked remarkably Earth-like: blue oceans, green and brown continents, white clouds swirling in the atmosphere. But as they drew closer, Sarah could see the differences. The continents were shaped differently, the oceans a slightly different shade of blue, and there were structures visible from orbit, massive structures, far larger than anything humans had ever built. "Cities," Randy breathed. "Those are cities." Or they were. The ship entered orbit, and the screens showed more detail. The cities were indeed massive, with towers that reached kilometers into the sky, and structures that sprawled across hundreds of square kilometers. But they were dark, lifeless. No lights, no movement, no signs of activity. "It's really dead," Sarah said quietly. "The whole planet is dead." "Maybe not the whole planet," Randy said, pointing at one of the screens. "Look, there. Do you see that?" Sarah looked where he was pointing and saw a faint energy signature coming from one of the continents. It was weak, barely detectable, but it was there. Something on Santerius was still active. "The archive," Sarah said. "It has to be." The ship's AI spoke. "Destination reached. Preparing for landing. Landing site. Archive facility. Northern continent. Estimated time to landing. 30 minutes. Sarah and Randy looked at each other, and Sarah reached out to take his hand. "Whatever we find down there," she said, "we face it together." "Together," Randy agreed. The ship began its descent, and Sarah watched through the screens as Santerius grew larger and larger. They passed through the atmosphere, and Sarah could see the surface in. Stunning detail, vast oceans, the color of deep sapphire, continents covered in what had once been forests but were now gray and withered, and the skeletal remains of cities that must have housed billions. The ship descended toward a mountain range that reminded Sarah painfully of the Andes, and as they drew closer, she could see a structure built into the mountainside itself. It was enormous, easily the size of a small city, with smooth metallic surfaces that caught the light of Santerius's sun. Unlike the dead cities they'd passed over, this structure still gleamed, still looked maintained. "Landing sequence initiated," the AI announced. "Please remain seated." The ship settled onto a landing platform with barely a tremor, and Sarah realized just how advanced the technology really was. They'd just traveled across the galaxy and landed on an alien world, and it had felt smoother than most commercial flights. The restraints released, and Sarah and Randy stood on shaky legs. "We should suit up," Randy said. "We don't know if the atmosphere is breathable." But the AI spoke before they could move. "Atmospheric analysis complete. Oxygen-nitrogen mixture compatible with human physiology. Temperature, 18 degrees Celsius. Pressure, standard. External environment is safe. Sarah and Randy exchanged glances. It knew we were human, Sarah said. It analyzed for human compatibility specifically. The Omega Protocol, Randy said. It really was designed for us, for Earth. They made their way to the airlock, and Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The outer door opened, and they stepped out onto the surface of an alien world. The air smelled clean, almost sterile, with a faint metallic tang. The sky was a deeper blue than Earth's, and the sun, Santerius's sun, was slightly larger and more orange. The landing platform was surrounded by the massive structure of the archive, its walls covered in the same script they'd first seen in the cave. Look, Randy said, pointing. A door in the archive wall was opening, a rectangle of warm light spilling out onto the platform. And in that light, Sarah could see figures moving. Tall figures, taller than humans, moving with a grace that seemed almost liquid. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered. "They're alive. The Santerians are alive." They walked toward the door, and as they got closer, Sarah could see the figures more clearly. They were humanoid but distinctly alien, tall and slender, with skin that had a faint iridescent quality, like mother of pearl. Their faces were elegant, with large eyes that seemed to hold depths of ancient wisdom. They wore simple robes in shades of blue and silver. One of them stepped forward, and when it spoke, Sarah heard the strange musical language of Santerian, but also overlaid on it English words that seemed to form directly in her mind. "Welcome, children of Earth," the Santerian said. "We have been waiting for you for a very long time." Act 5. Homecoming. Sarah felt Randy's hand find hers, and she squeezed it tightly. The Santerian who had spoken Sarah somehow knew it was female, though the gender markers were subtle, smiled, and the expression was warm and genuine despite the alienness of her features. "I am Keeper Thesara," she said. "I am one of the guardians of the archive. Please, come inside. You must have many questions." "That's an understatement," Sarah said, finding her voice. "We thought the learning chamber said your civilization was destroyed, that everyone died." Thesara's expression grew sad. "Most did. The plague took billions, but not all. Some of us survived, those who had already begun the genetic modifications, who had embraced the technology rather than feared it. We were immune, but we were too few to maintain our civilization. So we came here, to the archive, and we waited." "Waited for what?" Randy asked. "For you," Thesara said simply. "For Earth. For humanity." She led them into the archive, and Sarah's breath caught. The interior was vast, a cathedral of knowledge. Holographic displays floated everywhere, showing star charts, genetic sequences, historical records, and technologies Sarah couldn't even begin to understand. And there were more Santerians, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all working at various stations or moving through the halls with purpose. "I don't understand," Sarah said. "Why were you waiting for us? What is the Omega Protocol really?" Thesara led them to a central chamber, circular and domed, with a holographic display in the center showing 2 planets, Santerius and Earth. "Sit," she said, gesturing to seats that rose from the floor. "And I will tell you the truth that we have kept for 3,000 years. Sarah and Randy sat, and Thesara began. "Long ago, before the plague, before the war, our people looked to the stars and found something remarkable. We found Earth, we found humanity, and we discovered something that changed everything we thought we knew about the universe." The holographic display shifted, showing DNA helixes, 1 Santerian, 1 human. "We are related," Thesara said. "Not closely, not recently, but we share a common ancestor. Millions of years ago, a species we called the progenitors seeded life across the galaxy. They created the genetic templates that would eventually evolve into both Santerians and humans. We are, in the most literal sense, cousins." Sarah stared at the display, her mind reeling. "That's impossible. The distances, the timescales are vast." "Yes," Thesara agreed. "But the progenitors had technology far beyond even ours. They could manipulate space and time itself. They seeded thousands of worlds, creating the potential for intelligent life to arise. Most of those seeds failed, but some succeeded. Santerius, Earth, and others. But why? Randy asked. Why would they do that? We don't know, Thesaurus said. The progenitors vanished long before our civilization arose. All we have are fragments, hints in the genetic code itself, but we believe they were trying to ensure that intelligence, consciousness, would survive in the universe. That it would spread and grow, and eventually, perhaps, the children of different worlds would find each other. The display shifted again, showing the timeline of Santarian history, the rise of their civilization, the development of genetic engineering, the plague, the war. When we discovered Earth, we were overjoyed, Thesera continued. Here was proof that we were not alone, that other children of the progenitors had survived, but we were also afraid. We were in the midst of our own crisis, tearing ourselves apart over the very technology that might have saved us. We knew we might not survive. So we created the Omega Protocol. A backup plan, Sarah said, understanding dawning. You were creating a way to preserve your knowledge, your culture, in case you died out. More than that, Thesera said. We were creating a bridge, a way for Earth and Santerius to connect. Even if we were gone, we built ships and hid them on Earth, in places where they would remain undisturbed for millennia. We programmed them to activate when humans reached a certain level of development, when you had the language skills, the scientific knowledge, the curiosity to understand what you were finding. The cave, Randy said, the writing on the walls. It was a test. A trigger, Thesera corrected, when two humans with the right combination of skills, linguistics, and geology, the ability to read our language and understand our world, entered the cave together. The ship would activate. It would bring you here, to us, so that we could share what we knew, so that humanity wouldn't have to make the same mistakes we did. Sarah felt tears on her cheeks. But you survived. You're here. The Omega Protocol wasn't necessary. Wasn't it? Thesera asked gently. We survived, yes. A few thousand of us, out of billions. We have preserved our knowledge, maintained the archive. But we are a dying people, Sarah. We have extended our lives through technology, but we cannot reproduce. The genetic modifications that saved us from the plague also made us sterile. In another few centuries, we will be gone, and all of this, she gestured to the archive around them, will be silent and empty. Unless we pass it on. To us, Sarah said. To humanity. Yes, Thesera said. That is the true purpose of the Omega Protocol. Not just to preserve Santarian knowledge, but to give it to our cousins, to ensure that what we learned, what we built, what we discovered about the universe, will not die with us. You are our legacy, Sarah and Randy. You and all of humanity. Randy was shaking his head in wonder. I don't even have words. The implications for Earth, for science, for everything we thought we knew, are vast, Thesera agreed. Which is why we must be careful. Humanity is not ready for all of this knowledge at once. You are still young as a species, still learning, still making mistakes. If we simply gave you everything, our weapons, our most dangerous technologies, it could destroy you as surely as it nearly destroyed us. So what do we do? Sarah asked. Thesera smiled. You learn. You stay here, for a time, and we teach you. Not everything, not all at once, but enough. Enough to help guide humanity forward. Enough to help you avoid our mistakes. And then we send you home, with the knowledge you need and the wisdom to use it carefully. Over the following weeks, Sarah and Randy lived in the archive, and it was the most extraordinary time of their lives. They met other Santarians, scientists, historians, artists, philosophers. They learned about Santarian culture, their music and art and literature. They studied technologies that seemed like magic clean energy sources, medical treatments that could cure diseases Earth still struggled with, methods of food production that could end hunger. But they also learned about the dangers. They saw records of the war, of weapons that could crack planets, of genetic experiments that had created horrors. They understood why Thesera was cautious, why not everything could be shared. And they met others, not just Santarians, but representatives of other species who had found the archive. There was Krell, a being from a world called Vexor, whose people had also been seeded by the progenitors. There was a collective intelligence called the Harmony, existing as patterns of energy rather than physical form. The archive, it turned out, had become a meeting place, a hub for the scattered children of the progenitors to find each other. "There are dozens of us," Krell told them one evening, his crystalline form refracting the archive's lights into rainbows. Dozens of species descended from the progenitors' seeds. Most are young, like humanity. Some are older, like the Santerians. We are all trying to understand our place in the universe, our connection to each other. "It's like a family," Sarah said. "A galactic family." "Yes," Krell agreed. "And like any family, we must learn to help each other, to share what we know, to grow together." Through it all, Sarah and Randy's relationship deepened. They explored the archive together, learned together, marveled at the wonders together. At night, in the quarters the Santerians had provided, they held each other and talked about what it all meant, about the responsibility they now carried. "We're going to change the world," Randy said one night, staring up at the ceiling of their room, which displayed a perfect simulation of Earth's night sky. "When we get back, when we share what we've learned, everything will change." "I know," Sarah said. "It's terrifying." "But also exciting," Randy said. "We get to be part of something bigger than ourselves, bigger than Earth. We get to help humanity take its place among the stars." Sarah turned to look at him, and in the starlight, she could see the wonder and determination in his eyes. "I love you," she said. "I don't think I've said that enough, but I do. I love you, Randy Mitchell." He pulled her close and kissed her. "I love you too, Sarah Collins, and I can't imagine going through any of this with anyone else." After 6 weeks on Santerius, the Sarah came to them with news. "It is time," she said. "We have taught you what we can, given you what you need. Now you must return to Earth and begin the work of preparing your people." "How?" Sarah asked. "How do we even begin to explain all of this?" "Carefully," the Sarah said. "Slowly. You start with those you trust, with other scientists, with leaders who have the wisdom to understand. You share the technologies that will help most immediately, the medical treatments, the clean energy. You let humanity see the benefits before you reveal the full truth. And when the time is right, when Earth is ready, you tell them about us, about the progenitors, about the family waiting among the stars." "And the ship?" Randy asked. "How do we get home?" The Sarah smiled. "The same way you came. Your ship has been maintained, upgraded with some additional systems that will make the journey more comfortable, and we have programmed it with coordinates for Earth. The journey will take 46 days, just as before, but this time, you will not be traveling in fear and confusion. You will be traveling with purpose, with knowledge, with hope." They said their goodbyes to the Santerians they had come to know, to Krell and the Harmony and the others. There were tears Sarah's, and she was surprised to see some of the Santerians as well. They had formed bonds in those weeks, connections that transcended species. "You will return," the Sarah said, embracing Sarah in a gesture that felt both alien and deeply familiar. "When Earth is ready, when your people are prepared to join the greater community, you will come back, and we will welcome you as the family you are." "I promise," Sarah said. "We'll come back, and we'll bring others with us." The ship lifted off from Santerius, and Sarah and Randy watched through the screens as the archive grew smaller, as the planet receded into the distance. But this time, there was no fear, no panic, only a sense of purpose and anticipation. The journey back to Earth was different from the journey out. They spent their days reviewing the data the Santerians had given them, planning how they would approach their return, discussing which technologies to introduce first, and how to do it safely. They exercised in the gym, ate in the mess hall, and at night, they held each other in the quarters they now shared, talking about the future they would build together. "We should get married," Randy said one night, about 3 weeks into the journey. Sarah looked at him in surprise. "What?" "When we get back to Earth," Randy said. "Before we start trying to change the world, before everything gets crazy, I want to marry you, Sarah. I want to make it official. I want everyone to know that we're in this together for the rest of our lives." Sarah felt tears welling up, but they were happy tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely yes. I want that too." They kissed. And Sarah felt a sense of rightness, of completion. They had traveled to the stars and back, had discovered the secrets of humanity's origins, had been entrusted with knowledge that would change everything. But through it all, the most important thing, the thing that had kept them grounded and sane and hopeful, was each other. The ship emerged from its faster-than-light travel on a clear autumn day, appearing in Earth's orbit exactly where it had left 46 days earlier. The mountain in the Andes was still there, still remote and unexplored by anyone except them. Landing sequence initiated, the AI announced. Destination: original departure point. The ship descended through Earth's atmosphere, and Sarah felt a surge of emotion as she saw the familiar blue and green of her home planet. They had been gone for less than 3 months, but it felt like a lifetime. They were different people now, carrying knowledge and responsibility that would shape the future of their entire species. The ship settled back into the mountain, the entrance closing above them, the cave reforming around the vessel. It was as if they had never left, as if the whole thing had been a dream. But it wasn't a dream. The data storage devices the Santerians had given them, filled with carefully selected knowledge and technologies, were real. The changes in themselves, the growth and understanding they had gained, were real. The mission they now carried was real. They climbed out of the ship and made their way back up the ropes they had descended, what felt like a lifetime ago. The sun was setting over the Andes, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and Sarah paused to take it in, to appreciate the beauty of her home world with new eyes. "Ready?" Randy asked, standing beside her. Sarah took his hand. Ready. They hiked back to their base camp, where their equipment and supplies waited exactly as they had left them. They would radio for pickup in the morning, return to civilization, and begin the careful, delicate work of introducing humanity to its cosmic heritage. But that night, they sat by a campfire under the stars, and Sarah looked up at the vast expanse of the universe with a sense of wonder and belonging she had never felt before. Somewhere up there was Santerius, and the archive, and Thesara and the others. Somewhere up there were dozens of other worlds, other species, all children of the progenitors, all part of the same vast family. And here, on Earth, were 7 billion humans who didn't yet know they were part of something so much bigger than themselves. But they would learn. Sarah and Randy would make sure of it, carefully, slowly, wisely, but they would learn. "What are you thinking?" Randy asked, his arm around her shoulders. "I'm thinking about the future," Sarah said. "About all the work we have ahead of us. About how we're going to change the world." "Scared?" "Terrified," Sarah admitted, "but also excited. And grateful that I get to do this with you." Randy kissed the top of her head. "We're going to do amazing things, Dr. Collins. We're going to help humanity reach for the stars." "We already have," Sarah said, looking up at him with a smile. "We already have." Above them, the stars shone bright and clear, and Sarah could pick out the constellation where Santerius lay, invisible to the naked eye, but no longer unknown. They had traveled to the stars and back, had discovered humanity's place in the cosmos, and had returned home with the knowledge and tools to help their species take the next great step in its evolution. The journey was just beginning, but Sarah and Randy would face it together, as they had faced everything else, with love, with courage, with wonder, and with hope. And somewhere in the Andes, hidden beneath a mountain, a ship waited, ready for the day when humanity would be prepared to return to the stars, to rejoin the family that had been waiting for them all along. The Omega Protocol had succeeded. The bridge between worlds had been built, and the future, vast, uncertain, and full of infinite possibilities, stretched out before them like the universe itself. Together, they would explore it all. The end.